Welcome back to more UCL Fantasy content. This will be the best Limitless team for Matchday 7, and there are certain games going on as I speak, but there's never really an ideal time to record these UCL Fantasy or FPL videos if you're being quite honest, but there's going to be more information than if I had recorded it a couple of days ago. Looking at the bright side, if you enjoy the content or find it useful, then smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. We're looking to achieve big targets in 2025, starting with 32,000 subscribers. We hit multiple goals throughout 2024, especially in December, where we reached 30k subscribers. Thank you very much for your support, and we're pushing on towards new goals across all social media platforms. My Twitter, Instagram, Discord server, UCL Fantasy League, Drafthound, Spotify, and Blue Sky can all be found in the description. And there's also going to be my FPL League across all my FPL content, and there is more headed your way for Gimmick 23. Let's discuss though all the content you need for Matchday 7, everything you need to know in an ultimate guide. The best wildcard squad is headed your way. The same goes for my team selection, where I've got the wildcard available and 2 free transfers, and I'll discuss my chip strategy, the updated version, as there is a chip strategy guide on this channel already. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. If you are new to UCL Fantasy, the Limitless is like the free hit from FPL, where you build a team for a specific game week, but the key difference is you have no budget restrictions, so you can go for the most expensive players in each position, but you need to go for 2 goalkeepers, 5 defenders, 5 midfielders, and 3 forwards, just like you would with a wildcard or normal free transfers, and you need an eligible formation for your starting 11. You can still make substitutions and change the captaincy. The same rules for those aspects of the game still apply, but ultimately it's about building the best team for this specific match day. Then your team reverts back to how it was before you activate the chip. I'm going to start off with the 2 goalkeepers as always, and there are some interesting options, particularly on the Wednesday. One of those would be David Raya, who is without a clean sheet in 6 consecutive games across all competitions, and Arsenal have been very shaky in recent weeks. They crashed out of the FA Cup on penalties, and Raya was a disaster in that penalty shootout, the complete opposite to what he showed last season against Porto when he was man of the match and was the hero in that penalty shootout. And Arsenal just always seem to concede these goals, even at the Emirates now. So ultimately, their defence might be a bit of a risk to invest in, and I am possibly going to suggest a double up here, simply because their opponents, Dynamo Zagreb, are around 23rd in the Champions League league phase table, whilst Arsenal are 3rd and have conceded 2 goals in this competition, one of which was a penalty against one of the best sides in Europe in Inter Milan. So David Raya remains a good option, but if you want to go elsewhere, I completely understand that, because Saliba will miss this game in Matchday 7. He's in my own squad, just about great, thank you so much. That's going to be difficult to navigate. But on the Limitless, I think the likes of Timber, who's really cheap by the way, you can buy him on the wildcard or with free transfers, Gabriel, and then David Raya will be the best ways of covering Arsenal defensively. But on the Tuesday, we don't have as many options for the goalkeepers, and even in terms of defenders, you could argue. But I'm going to go for cCaFxb, with Atalanta still right up there in Serie A, only behind Napoli and Inter Milan, and they face Sturmgrass at home. So I wouldn't mind a defensive double-up for Atalanta here. They're another squad, just like Arsenal, who have a great defensive record in Europe, and I honestly wouldn't mind cCaFxb. Despite the fact it's a Limitless, you always want to go for the most expensive options. He only costs 4.5 million, and he's a great goalkeeper between the sticks. I won't deny that I'm less keen on doubling up on Arsenal defensively, and even going for their assets in general. I'm definitely not keen on going for a midfielder or forward, even though the likes of Trossard have been in good form over the last 2 games. I just don't think they're clinical enough, and Arsenal can be quite toothless in certain matches, which leads to uncertainty around the stadium, and then the opponents seemingly score with one of the only few big chances, and then the pressure just piles on. But Gabriel, despite blanking in 4 consecutive games in the Premier League, he's still been brilliant in a lot of those matches, including a man-of-the-match performance in the North London derby, but he got booked in that game and delivered 1 point in FPL. Thankfully in UCL Fantasy we've got ball recoveries, so Gabriel can always give you a decent return even if he doesn't get a clean sheet, but I'm not going to deny that that is going to be the bulk of Gabriel's points. A clean sheet complemented by ball recoveries will be your most likely source of returns, but he can score from set pieces. Arsenal have been brilliant at them since the beginning of last season, and they've scored the most goals from those situations of any team across Europe's top 5 leagues. Next up though is not a great UCL Fantasy asset, but he plays for one of the biggest clubs in the world, if not the biggest. They have something to play for as they are in a precarious situation in the Champions League, and that's going to be Antonio Rudiger, who was a good option back in his Chelsea days when he lifted the Champions League title with the London club, but I don't think he's been anywhere near those levels in UCL Fantasy because the ball recoveries have been few and far between compared to what he used to do for Chelsea. But I do like Rudiger, and he's got a great fixture against RB Salzburg. He's also got a bit of attacking potential, although not to the same level as Gabriel, for example. And I do think Real Madrid are worth doubling or tripling up on, but you certainly would rather double up on their attackers and stick with one defender or Thibaut Courtois in goal. But let's now go to a cheaper option, but of course that's not too relevant in the Limitless chip, of course. Kolasinac and a defensive double up on Atalanta is still viable, but just be careful about doubling or tripling up on too many teams defensively, and the same goes offensively, of course, but especially in this position where clean sheets will be the biggest source of points, it could be a bit problematic, and it's ultimately about your trust in these teams defensively, and I think Atalanta have that in abundance with a great home fixture against Sturm Graz. I think they'll win the game and keep a clean sheet in the process. Kolasinac has been brilliant in terms of ball recoveries, and he also has clean sheets there, the odd attacking potential, so I think it's a good investment on any chip, even with free transfers as well. But let's complete this defensive line with some interesting options, to say the least, and one of them will be a huge rotation risk, even in Matchday 7, but if we get murmurings of him starting, I think he's worth going for on the Limitless, and that's Trent Alexander-Arnold, who got 11 points in FPL in Game Week 22, with an assist in the 91st minute for Darwin Núñez to change the game against Brentford and give Liverpool a healthy and commanding lead in the Premier League title race. I say title race, there's not really any, to be honest, but I think Trent is a great investment for UCL Fantasy and FPL, and I think Liverpool players are worth doubling or tripling up on. But on the wildcard, it could be a little bit different, because in Matchday 8, they will surely rotate, as they also find themselves in a great position in the Champions League, top of the table. A win against Lille, which is very likely, will secure their spot in the last 16, and Liverpool have had a fantastic season all round. They're competing on all fronts. You'd expect them to bounce back in the Carabao Cup semi-finals, the second leg, despite their 1-0 deficit, and they're also going strong in the FA Cup. But the final defender is going to be an interesting one, I think, and there are plenty of options from different teams, but I think Inter Milan are still one of the best defences in Europe. They have a few games in hand on Napoli, the league leaders in Serie A. If they win both of those matches, they will be level on points with Napoli, but Denzel Dumfries is an interesting one. I think you've got plenty of options in that Inter Milan defence, and they have rotated a lot in that position since Matchday 1, so I don't think any of them are particularly safe, but if you can nail on that right Inter Milan defender on the Limitless or wildcard, I think it's just a great option for you. Maybe just go safe, and Jan Sommer as your goalkeeper kind of secures those clean sheets and those defensive returns, because the likes of Dumfries could be rotated. So definitely reconsider this one. You might want to go for Sommer instead of David Raya, and then go for a different defender instead of Denzel Dumfries. But our options are quite limited, I think, compared to the previous match days. And with this chip, by the way, the Limitless, I would not recommend using it in Matchday 8, because you can essentially have a Limitless squad with your wildcard chip in Matchday 8 and just cheap out your bench. I believe the lack of substitutions will be to your detriment on the Limitless. Having 15 players that are expensive with plum fixtures is always the play, and that's why my chip strategy guide, I recommended using the Limitless between match days 2 to 7. You can activate it later in the competition, but with an increase in budget for the round of 16 and beyond, it just makes it easier to build your ideal 15-man squad without the use of this chip. And you've got tougher fixtures and more challenging games. You've got more surprises as we've got more balanced matches and ties. So I just think using it in the league phase, or as it was previously called, the group stages, is the best play. But Matchday 8, despite having all the lineups, which is a great plus point, and you can basically navigate rotation that way, I think the Limitless is kind of watered down by using it in the final matchday of the league phase. But that's the defensive line. I'd be looking to cover the likes of Arsenal, Real Madrid, potentially Liverpool, although it's quite risky, and Inter Milan. But there are other teams to cover, of course, as always. But even the likes of Man City, who have shown a bit of form recently, they're facing PSG away from home. While I'm not too keen on investing in Barcelona defensively, their attackers are still worth buying. Rafinha would be one of them, and I think he's a level above Lamine Yamal in terms of goal output in this midfield. So Rafinha would be one of the first names. You could argue that Barcelona might rotate in either matchday 7 or 8, and they've got some fairly tough games on paper. Even Benfica away is going to be quite challenging, but Barcelona have scored the most goals in the Champions League league phase with 21, and they also don't really rotate under Hansi Flick. They have been fairly poor in La Liga recently, 1 victory out of the last 5 matches, but they're still third in the table, not too far behind Real Madrid, the league leaders, and Atletico. And Rafinha's had a brilliant season all round with consistent goals and assists output. He's really been consistent since March, actually, and I've been highlighting this in most of my UCL Fantasy videos. Now, Jude Bellingham had a pretty poor start to the season, but he's finally coming alive, and I think he's worth investment on the Limitless. I actually had him from Matchday 1, and I sold him a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's now time to buy him back if you can, but it will be a luxury transfer in terms of not using a chip. If you have the Limitless or Wildcard though, I think Bellingham would be in your best interest. He's one of the best midfielders in the game, and on current form, I think he can get a lot of goal contributions for the final 2 match days of the league phase, and Real Madrid have something to play for, so you don't expect rotation there, and Bellingham rarely gets rested regardless, so he'd be a great investment, and a triple up in Real Madrid is certainly viable. You could even triple up on their attack with Bellingham, Mbappe, and Vinicius Jr. But let's now go to other midfielders, and despite being cheap, I still think he's worth investment on the Limitless chip, and that's going to be Lookman, who has been getting the goals on a very consistent basis for Atalanta, particularly away from home. And with this plum fixture against Sturmgrass at home, I think Lookman is worth investment, whether it's a Limitless, wildcard, or normal transfers. There's a reason why he has featured in so many of these videos throughout this season. He performs at such a level that far exceeds his price point, so he offers insane value at around 6.7 million. But next up is going to be Mohamed Salah, who has dipped recently, but Liverpool are still going extremely strong, and if Salah starts against Lille, he is a front runner for the captaincy, especially on the Tuesday, and that's one of the positive things about him. If he does get rested or just makes a brief cameo off the bench, at least you've got a backup Wednesday option like Vinicius or Mbappe, so you can switch to captaincy from Salah and actually bench him if he ends up being quite disappointing. But I think he will start. Let's see what the Liverpool lineups and stuff like that will say. And in the deadline stream on Tuesday, I'll be covering this because we might get some information before the deadline. But let's wrap things up with one of the best young talents in the world, probably the best dribbler in world football right now, and that's Jamal Musiala, who's also increased his output in terms of goals and assists this season. So I think Musiala's made that next step in his trajectory, and Bayern Munich are worth doubling up on offensively. That could also include Elise, who has 20 goals and assists in 25 matches for the Bavarians, and Harry Kane up front is one of the best strikers in world football. But I'm very happy with this midfield 5. You could make 1 or 2 tweaks. Maybe Lookman could make way for you, or Mohamed Salah if you don't back him to start. But the likes of Bellingham, Rafinha, and arguably Musiala are quite nailed on in this midfield. It's going to be a really tough call to choose between Vinicius Jr. or Kylian Mbappe, and it's worth noting that Vinicius Jr. didn't feature at the weekend in a 4-1 victory over Las Palmas because he was suspended, and it was Mbappe scoring a brace and also converting a penalty. But after the game, Ancelotti was asked about this in his press conference about the list of penalty takers. He said Vinicius is first, Mbappe second, and Bellingham is third. So that's why Vinicius has just about shaded it. But Mbappe has been in brilliant form recently. It was always going to be coming. I think it's quite inevitable that Mbappe would prove to be a great signing for Real Madrid. Now, they still have some issues in terms of balance, and we've seen that in Champions League particularly. A lot of Real Madrid fans actually want Carlo Ancelotti out, but I mean, you could say they're entitled, they're kind of spoiled. We all know Real Madrid, but they are the biggest club in world football, and I think a double or triple up is a very good option. I think it's a great plus for those on the Limitless or wildcard because you'll pretty much get a guaranteed start from all of these assets, including Rudiger, maybe Courtois at the back, Bellingham, Mbappe, and Vinicius Jr. I actually wouldn't mind going for both Vinicius and Mbappe and then Bellingham, like I mentioned earlier. I think their attackers are certainly much more appealing than the defence. They've kept 3 clean sheets in the last 6 games, I believe, across all competitions, but they're not the best defensively, and you compare them to the likes of Inter Milan, even Arsenal potentially, and you do think Real Madrid are a bit shakier defensively, although Arsenal at the moment aren't exactly the most secure at the back. But let's go to some other forwards, and Robert Lewandowski does make it despite facing Benfica away, not the easiest of games, and Barcelona actually have missed the most big chances in La Liga. I think it's 55 big chances overall, and they have missed quite a lot of them. So Lewandowski has been at fault for that. In the last month, I think his incredible form at the beginning of the season has slowly waned, but in certain big games, he's still delivering the goods. In the Super Cup final of Spain, Barcelona thrashed Real Madrid, and Lewandowski played a pivotal role, but sometimes he can waste some gilt-edged chances, and he can be very frustrating for the Catalan supporters. I still think he's worth including on a Limitless team though, but you've got Gyökeres, you've got Guirassy, and a few others. You might be wondering why there are no Borussia Dortmund players in this list though. You can still go for Gittins and Guirassy, but I'd be a bit careful about that because Borussia Dortmund are in terrible form. They just lost 2-0, and the game before that they lost to a newly promoted side 4-2, and Nuri Sahin is under serious pressure from Borussia Dortmund fans. and you could say his days are numbered there at Borussia Dortmund. But let's complete this team and go for Harry Kane and double up on Bayern Munich offensively. You might even want to consider, by the way, Phil Foden in the midfield. He has been brilliant. He got a brace and an assist in a 6-0 win for Man City over Ipswich Town away, a team that beat Tottenham Hotspur at their own ground, and also Chelsea very recently. So Man City might be back, you could say. I still think they're quite shaky defensively. I wouldn't go there. Even Gvardiol with the attacking potential, probably a no-go. Erling Haaland scored, but I don't think he's quite the same compared to the beginning of this season. Phil Foden in the midfield, though, could be a great investment. And offensively, apart from Vinicius/Mbappe, maybe even both, Lewandowski, Kane, I'd be looking at Gyökeres, as mentioned earlier, Guirassy, and you could still go for a Bayer Leverkusen or Atletico Madrid player. And let's not forget, before Atletico Madrid's 1-0 loss against Leganés, they were actually unbeaten in 15 games. Not only that, they won 15 consecutive matches. So there are a lot of options in UCL Fantasy. There always are, especially in the forward line. But I do think we're a bit more limited now compared to previous match days, especially in that defence. And ultimately, this 50-man squad is extremely strong. The same applies to the captaincy options within this 50-man squad. And one of them will be Mohamed Salah on the Tuesday. He takes the cake even over Robert Lewandowski, but there are some concerns about Liverpool and their starting 11 against Lille because they could rotate and still get the job done. But Salah would be my first choice captain on the Tuesday. And on the Wednesday, I would go for a Real Madrid asset. So either Vinicius Jr. or Mbappe. You might even want to go for someone like Bellingham, and Bayern Munich attackers like Kane or Musiala are nice alternatives. And also Rafinha, to be fair, on the Tuesday would be a good choice for the captaincy. Probably over Robert Lewandowski at this moment in time, but that's certainly debatable. Lookman isn't too shabby, and like I said earlier, if you want to go a little bit different, despite a tough game against PSG away, I think the form of Phil Foden is incredible. He has produced returns in the last 6 matches, and I think he's really gone up a level. He had a terrible start to the season, but what we're seeing recently is the Foden of old, especially from last season when he won the Premier League Player of the Season award. So I think that really culminates into a great option. Maybe you replace Salah with Foden instead, and you can also double or triple up on certain teams like Real Madrid offensively, but it's all down to you. There are so many different ways to skin a cat, and in UCL Fantasy, it can be a lot more interesting and open-ended compared to FPL. One player was very close to making it to this Limitless team and potentially the wildcard squad as well was Christian Pulisic, but we got an update from the new AC Milan manager Conceição before their 2-0 defeat against Juventus, and he said the following: Pulisic is out, I don't feel like bluffing, he still feels some discomfort, and I don't want to take any risks. It's nothing serious, but if he plays for about 20 minutes, he risks worsening his condition, and I don't want that. So Pulisic, it's looking quite unlikely he'll feature Matchday 7. He might make it into the squad, but is he going to start the game? I couldn't guarantee you that. If we get some positive updates over the coming days, he's another one to consider to bolster your midfield and potentially replace one of Salah if you don't back him to start, or Lookman. But I have to say, what you got there with that Limitless squad was already very strong, and you could make a few changes depending on which teams you back to win heavily this week. And in Matchday 7, there are some plum fixtures for some of the best teams across Europe. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Our aim is to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 32,000 subscribers. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below, like my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. And a huge shout out goes to those that gift the memberships in the recent streams. There's also my Discord server, UCL Fantasy League, Spotify, and Blue Sky, so check them out. All of that is very easily findable, and at the beginning of this video, on screen I showed the UCL Fantasy League that you can join very easily. I wish you all the best of luck for Matchday 7, enjoy the Champions League football, and I'll see you very soon for that deadline stream on Tuesday.